BLM riots in Kentucky and across the country. Dr. Fauci versus Dr. Paul on herd immunity. And Democrats gear up for the biggest smear campaign anyone's ever seen. Welcome, friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. Great to have you with me. And no surprises about what has happened in the last 24 hours. Yesterday on the show, I mentioned to you that Breonna Taylor's case had been decided by a grand jury, and the Kentucky Attorney General gave a lengthy statement about exactly how he came to the decision, or rather how the grand jury came to the decision, but he explained the law and how it applies here. Let's just, before I get into the riots and the lunacy and the stupid Democrat commentary around this, all that, and the lies, pile the top lies of the BLM movement, before I get, let's just make sure we understand the facts as they are. These are the baseline things you must know before you can even really have an opinion on the Breonna Taylor case, and certainly before anybody could think they have a justification to protest or even riot, although there's no justification for rioting over this issue. And there were protests in Louisville, in New York, in Seattle, in Portland. I mean, this is all over the place, right? All kinds of insanity, people being intimidated, people being threatened on the street. But let's just start with the facts. I think that's the most helpful way to look at this problem today. Police were serving a legitimate warrant, and the police officers serving the warrant weren't even the ones working the case before. So their job was just to go in and effect the arrest. That's it. They weren't the ones doing the investigation beforehand. There's no personal animus. There's no, we're going to go get this person. They were just there to effect an arrest. And when they knocked on the door, it was not a no-knock raid, which we were told for months, and which was a lie. Now, you could say, Buck, well, maybe that was a good faith error. Why would every news outlet report that it was a no-knock raid before we knew whether or not that was the case? Clearly, they just took the side of Breonna Taylor's boyfriend in this, or they believed him and assumed that it must be the police who were lying, because the police held all along that they were the ones who knocked and that there was nothing that they did in that process that was unjust, that was wrong. Kenneth Walker was the guy, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, who shot at police. So he opens fire on the officers. Okay, he opens fire on the officers, Kenneth Walker, and they return fire. And they're shooting back. And they don't hit Kenneth Walker. A police officer was hit in the initial gunfire from Walker, but they hit Breonna Taylor. Now, there's also been the claim for many months now, this goes back to March, that Breonna Taylor was asleep. So the story that people were told, that the activists, the anti-cop movement out there, BLM, the Democrat media, CNN, I mean, CNN's a disgusting disgrace full of reckless morons. I mean, MSNBC is no better, but the story that people were told all this time was that Breonna Taylor was asleep in bed and was shot to death by cops who did a no-knock raid, and they just bust in and started shooting for no reason. That was the story that people were told. And that spread all across the country. And celebrities, even of the reach and stature of LeBron James, made Breonna Taylor's case a huge cause. Right? Look what happened to Breonna Taylor. And people believe that what they initially were told about this is still true. Now there must be a cover-up, right? Now there must be something else that's gone on here. And once you understand the facts, it's very clear what did happen and what the real assessment of the situation should be. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It was an accident. They were not trying to shoot Breonna Taylor. This was caught in the crossfire. That's what ended up happening here. Because you can't shoot at cops and expect them not to shoot back. I don't care how many so-called lib. They always get some former, sergeant from somewhere, some former law enforcement officer who somehow just hates cops, hates the police. And they get tons of lawyers, these ACLU types who will go on air and all they want to do is trash the police all the time. It doesn't matter what they say about the right to self-defense. Police are going to defend themselves. I don't even care what the regulations say. If you have a firearm and someone is shooting at you, you're going to shoot back. You're not going to sit there and wonder about maybe the other person will miss because you don't want to have to use your weapon. It's absurd. I understand. Why are we even having this discussion? It's so obvious. Well, we're having this discussion because there are people out there who simply don't care what the facts and what the truth are. We're having this discussion because there are people in the police reform movement of the Democrat Party, and this is a Democrat movement, who even the examples you could point to where you say, well, can't we all agree? Can't we all agree that law enforcement should be able to defend themselves when shot on? And there are Democrats now who would say, no, we can't all agree with that because of the legacy of systemic racism in the police department. And maybe the cops have to take a little extra care here and just allow themselves to be put in lethal jeopardy, which is never going to happen. But this is a deranged position. And we've been crawling toward this for a while now. Remember, it was that police officer in Atlanta who wrestled the guy who was non-compliant, who fought the officers, who resisted arrest, took one of their weapons away, and then tried to use a taser on the officer. And as he turns to use the taser on the officer fires, and they claim that this was murder. No, you're supposed to get tasered if you're a cop. You're supposed to allow a perpetrator to use a less than lethal on you and then hope that perpetrator, who is obviously angry and full of adrenaline at that moment, doesn't decide to take your side or take your service weapon and use it on you as a police officer and execute you right there while you're helpless. That was what we learned from the Atlanta case, where a disgusting district attorney, completely political, a total hack, brought a murder charge against that officer. Murder one. They could give that officer the death penalty. That's how unjust the left is when it comes to these issues. You see, the left doesn't like police because they don't want the mob, they don't want their emotional rabble to be constrained by laws. They don't want people to feel like they can't do whatever the mob demands because there are people who stand in the way. There are people who stand ready to, yes, do violence in the name of the law so that you and I can sleep soundly at night. Left doesn't like that. Meanwhile, they'll use the force of the law for very minor transgressions. Some of you may have seen the video of the woman who was arrested at an outdoor baseball, like Little League game, standing, or sitting in the stands, didn't have a mask on. So they arrest her. Oh, okay. People say, well, Buck, no. They told her to put a mask on, and then when she wouldn't, they said she's trespassing, and then they arrested her. Okay, they arrested her for not having a mask on. That's right. They took away her freedom. They processed her because she didn't wear a mask outside. And all the libs will cheer for this. I hope Fauci is proud of what he's done to this country, that little moron. Yeah, no, I'm done with him. I've been done with him for a while, but I'm not even pretending to think. This guy is, I just see the slimy BS arguments from him now all the time. Never admits all the catastrophically wrong things that have been said by him in the past, and just continues to make everybody feel like we have no future. We're going to have to keep wearing masks even after a vaccine. No vaccine's perfect. Got to keep wearing masks. Probably multiple iterations of vaccines. Got to social distance forever. I just want to tell Fauci, go blank yourself. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't care that you're the world's expert on this. The world's expert didn't do a damn thing to help us when this actually could have been slowed down in the early days. You know, we turn around, we ask the medical community to give us, please pass your wisdom to us from on high, medical policy experts. Oh, wisdom, like, let's get everybody on ventilators as fast as possible. They're not going to tell you this right now, but I know this from talking to other doctors. A lot of lives could have been saved. They had just used oxygen masks instead of ventilators. But remember the whole push for, Trump's not using the Defense Production Act. Trump's not doing enough to get the ventilators. No, now we got ventilators that we're going to have to turn into espresso machines. We got nothing to do with them. Ventilators cause infection very quickly. They're an absolute last resort. They're not meant for the long-term usage of trying to keep people breathing when they have this COVID problem, which is why, you went on the ventilator, you had a 50% chance of dying on it. But the top caste, the elites of the medical policy community, they really have been doing a great job. Heck of a job you've done, Fauci. Heck of a job. So back to, I'm particularly annoyed about that today too. Back to Fauci. I'm sorry. Back to Breonna Taylor here. There was an injustice done yesterday, and it was not the decision to forego murder charges. That the grand jury did not think there was a murder here, and there wasn't. Obviously, shooting at someone who's trying to shoot you and missing and hitting somebody behind that person doesn't make you a murderer. It makes you human. It means you made an error, a tactical error under pressure that a lot of people would make, even people who are trained. But there was injustice yesterday. There are, in fact, two injustices that I want to talk to you about. Neither one of them have to do with cops not being indicted for Breonna Taylor's shooting.
It is shameful what came out of the Attorney General's office and the grand jury, not because of grand jurors, but because we know that prosecutors craft their own narrative. They can expand the number of witnesses that go into a grand jury, or it can be very narrow. And if there is an issue of fact and law that still remains, individuals should have the right to express their defense in a trial by their peers. He did not do that. The Attorney General of Kentucky did not do that. It is very obvious to us that there was a grave injustice because did he call the other witnesses who said they did not hear the officers announce themselves? Were some of the officers in plain clothes so that if you're in the middle of the night coming into a private home, which is another very sacred place in Americans' hearts, in the middle of the night, plain clothes, and people were asleep and they could not see who you were? Did he not add that narrative so that grand jurors could understand what it means? And then let me just say this, it was a defective warrant.
Just making stuff up at this point. That's Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. Find witnesses who didn't hear a thing. Well, the witness in the apartment adjoining, because this was in apartment 3, and the person in apartment 4 heard the knock and very clearly said, I heard them say, police, open up, warrant. Or, police, search warrant. So you can find other people who didn't see something. That's not how proof works. Right? You can find someone who's 2 blocks away from a shooting. Did you see the shooter? No. That's meaningless. All that matters is that there's a witness who heard this. It doesn't matter that there are other people elsewhere who didn't hear it. That's not how evidence works. Unless they were closer to the sound of the noise, but even then, where were they? And she knows better about the investigation than the people that spent months doing this. No, she's just making stuff up. This is just being a sore loser because she wanted a political outcome here. That's what Representative Jackson Lee wanted. She wanted people to be prosecuted because there's anger. Because there's anger among Democrats, because there's anger within a segment of the black community over this shooting. It is a tragedy. It's a sad thing. Bad things do happen. Bad things do not equal somebody goes on trial for murder. This is not a complicated idea, but Democrats, when they can't get their way, they'll pretend that they just can't comprehend. Whoa, I don't understand. This is terrible. This is such an awful thing that they didn't, They thought there should be a murder charge? Oh, I get it. You know what you really see? They just want to see a cop here get charged and go through that and and maybe then when the verdict comes out, they'll say, well, no, of course not. When the verdict happens and it's not guilty because the cop is clearly not guilty, then they'll call for more civil unrest, more riots. You know what the injustice was that was done yesterday by the grand jury? It was the decision to indict on 3 counts of wanton endangerment because one officer, not even the one who shot fatally Breonna Taylor, one officer fired rounds that went into a neighboring apartment. Anybody who knows anything about ballistics understands that can happen. Okay, that's why it's such a big deal when police have to pull their weapons and use them. So now it's, by the way, a bullet could go through a person, depending on the caliber and the proximity. A bullet could go through a person and hit a person behind them. So now you're going to hold that person accountable for that too? If it's a legally justified use of force, you're expecting the perfect usage of force? No. So what they did was put these 3 wanton endangerment charges under Kentucky law against one officer who didn't kill Breonna Taylor. He didn't even kill Breonna Taylor. Right? There's murder and there's killing. Killing means you take someone's life. Murder is you illegally and immorally take someone's life. He didn't do either of those things. He just fired at her boyfriend, who I've also got to say, people are banging at your door at 3 o'clock in the morning. You just start blasting? You just start blasting at them? I mean, that's a risky thing to do, especially when it's very possible they're police, and especially when, based on some of the additional evidence here, it is still believed by law enforcement that Walker was involved in the drug trade, okay? He thought it was drug dealers coming to rob him. They just happened to be coming to that apartment to rob him at 3 a.m. He just happened to be the luck of the draw there for him. Let's use our heads, folks. But no, the injustice here was the charging of one officer with 3 counts of wanton endangerment as just an offering to the mob, trying to buy them off. Here you go. We won't let him off entirely, guys. We know this was a bad situation, but let's try to charge this officer. He could theoretically go to prison for 15 years for this, folks. It's not a little thing. 3 felony counts of wanton endangerment. That's injustice. You don't charge somebody. You don't use the power of a prosecutor's office to try to make the angry, ignorant mob happier. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's not the system we live under. If they're going to tell me that I can't in New York City have, 2 or 3 AR-15s and a couple of handguns and a couple of shotguns, which is what I'd like to have if I could. If they're going to tell me that under law I can't do any of those things, they better darn well actually enforce the law as it's written. We keep saying, no, they want to defund police, and they want to disarm you, and they want to punish people that try to protect themselves. The injustice from the court yesterday was charging an officer with anything. And then there was a whole lot more injustice. And it wasn't about the non-charging of officers. What does the COVID-19 pandemic have to do with you losing your home? Well, you see, it's pretty straightforward. Cybercrime, according to the FBI, is up about 75% over the course of this pandemic, and home title theft is actually a cybercrime. Here's how it works. The bad guys find your information online. It exists there. And then they kick you off the deed to your home, put themselves on using a quitclaim deed, and then they take out loans based on the equity in your home. So they get the money and they stick you with the payments. The usual identity theft services don't protect you from this, and sometimes people only find out after they get the foreclosure notice on their home, okay? You've got to take action today. Protect yourself by creating a virtual barrier around your home's title with Home Title Lock. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. Use the promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. That's HomeTitleLock.com. Promo code BUCK. That will get you 30 free days of protection. You can also check at HomeTitleLock.com to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it yet.
I think it's grossly insufficient. It does not deal with the fact that the life of Breonna Taylor was taken. It does not address being a victim of being killed. The value of her life is not at all addressed in these charges. You could get endangerment if you shot in the air at nothing. You took a woman's life, a woman who was in no way should have even been in that situation because the person you were pursuing was not there. She committed no crime. Her only act that night was she went to bed that night, and she is dead. The indictment does not address the life. When we say Black Lives Matter, this indictment says it does not matter.
Reckless demagoguery from a man who has excelled in that area and excelled at starting race riots, too, stretching back for decades now. The Reverend Al Sharpton saying that Black lives do not matter because of this decision from the court. That's his claim. I heard other commentators saying the same thing. They love over at CNN and MSNBC to put people on TV who will say just that this tells us that the court does not find that Black lives matter. Oh, here, CNN, Bakari Sellers, play 9.
I think it's pretty clear that Black lives do not matter. I think it's pretty clear that justice is fleeting, that if you are a person of color, particularly a Black woman in this country, the quest for justice and the road to get justice is longer and harder than most. And I think that yesterday there was more concern for the walls of the apartment next door. These charges these officers face, or that officer faces, is a sham. When you have one person who's charged for just shooting a gun willy-nilly, as we say down south, with a $15,000 bond, sometimes you just have to smile at the absurdity.
See, it doesn't actually placate the angry mob and the demagogues who rile them up when you put forward these charges of reckless endangerment, which is clearly what this was meant to be. It was a consolation prize. Here you go, guys. We'll charge one of the cops. So then at least the headlines can say one officer charged. He's going to beat the charge. The charge is nonsense. All right? The charge is effectively, shooting back at someone who shot at you and not putting every round. Imagine if they actually hit Walker with all the rounds they fired. Then it would be, oh my gosh, excessive force. Look what there's no way to make people happy. They've set themselves into a narrative that they will not move from. They're just dedicated to this now. It doesn't matter what the facts turned out to be. Bakari Sellers, Reverend Al, any of them, Chris Cuomo over at CNN, all misstating facts on this constantly. None of them say, wow, I guess we shouldn't have been saying all along that it was a no-knock raid. It wasn't a no-knock raid. Well, now they're just going to say the eyewitnesses got it right. They did the same thing with Mike Brown. You had black eyewitnesses that said Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, charged the officer, attacked the officer, and the officer shot him while Mike Brown was charging at him, running at him to tackle him. Mike Brown was a very large man, by the way. The officer was not. And they just say, oh, well, they memories, and they get it wrong. And so, you see, that's the thing. There's no such thing as facts for this group. There's no such thing as facts when it comes to all these issues for the left. Because even when we have things that we should all say, okay, here's what happened, to the best of our ability to know anything, here's what happened. They'll say, no, we don't agree that's what happened. No, what happened is a thing that we tell you we want to say happened. That's their approach. It's very hard to argue with somebody when you can't even work from the same reality. They're operating from a different reality. I mean, if they're going to talk about how the settlement, or rather the charges didn't deal with the value of Breonna Taylor's life, the charges have to do not with showing how much they value someone's life. The charges are about, did this person or persons commit a criminal act for which we, the state, are going to punish them, ruin their lives? But that's what justice demands. Did they commit a criminal act? Did they have the mens rea, the state of mind necessary to be held criminally culpable for this? The law isn't just, I'm upset about something and I want someone to be punished. That's not the law. That's not. If it were, we would all constantly be getting marched off to prison camps by libs who are upset about all the CO2 we're putting into the air. Right? That's not the law. There is no good faith argument that what happened here is wrong, meaning that there were no murder charges. It's not a murder. It's just not. I mean, they can argue about this all day. It is a tragedy. It is a tragedy. If a city employee was driving a garbage truck and the brakes failed and that city employee ran over somebody in a crosswalk, that's horrible. That's a tragedy. It's awful. Bad things happen in the world. That's a terrible thing. And we should all do what we can, and society has an obligation to help out that family that has that law. But you don't lock, I mean, if the brakes failed, you don't lock up the guy driving the truck as a murderer. Doesn't matter how upset people are. Not a murderer. This is an important distinction here. But you see, they're trying to use emotion to overcome and erode the law. They're saying the most inflammatory things possible. And here you have multiple commentators that I saw, and I'm sure there are a whole lot more, saying that this judgment shows that they believe, quote, black lives do not matter, end quote. Wow. You see a lot of people yesterday talking about how Breonna Taylor's family got $12 million from the city of Louisville. That's the city of Louisville saying, we are really sorry about what happened. This should not have happened. And we're going to try to help take care of your family and try to ease your pain in some way, even though they'll never be able to make it right. Money doesn't make it right. And I totally get that and accept that. But that's where the societal culpability here, the system's culpability comes in, paying for an accident, a tragic accident. You don't lock people up for an accident. I know you say, Buck, but those officers chose to draw their weapons. They did what they were supposed to do. When someone is shooting at you and you're a cop and you've said police, search warrant, and they shoot at you, you shoot back. Full stop. We're not going to budge on this. We're going to have to start digging in, folks, and being a little absolute on some basic principles, because the left is playing games with all of this now. Oh, maybe they didn't need to shoot back. Maybe they could get like a magic, net gun and just wrap the net around somebody so that then they don't have to shoot. I mean, this is the kind of idiocy I hear liberals. I'm being serious. I hear them talking about things like this. Maybe we have there's a dart gun they can use or something else to incapacitate a person shooting at police. No, we have less than lethals. They try to use them sometimes. When someone's shooting at you, you're not shooting back with a taser. But they don't really care about the truth here, about what's really happening. This was all about a narrative. It's all about a storyline. And ultimately, we have to confront this. People get uncomfortable doing it. They don't want to hear it. Many of them still believe it. The story that the police are systematically hunting black men and murdering them without consequence, that is the central premise of Black Lives Matter movement, is a lie. It's a lie. It's just not true. And they can keep saying it and keep getting worked up about it. It's not true. No part of that. It is not systematic. It is not continuous. It is not widespread. It is not unpunished. And oftentimes they're picking cases where it's not even an unjust shooting. Not always, but most of the time. Most of the time. The shootings that they pick to make a major cause for the movement, they lie about what happened, and then we find out the truth. They just pretend like we don't know what really happened anymore. Friends, this is about rage and resentment and envy mobilized for the purposes of the Democrat Party. That's what is really going on here. Just tearing us apart, hurting us as a country. We do not benefit from this. No one benefits from this except those who use this for their own power. Doesn't make our community safer. Doesn't make us get along better as a people. America is this incredibly diverse country, and we do get along very well overall as a people. You look at us compared to a lot of other countries and what goes on there. The Democrats want to pull all that apart. They want to undo the very foundation of our justice system. They want to pretend that just because people feel a certain way, the facts don't get to interfere with their feelings. And that's not true. That's not true. But you're going to see a lot more lies about this. And you're never going to see a leftist have a debate with somebody who understands these facts and is adept on it, because they would get crushed. They can't actually handle an exchange here. They're going to say, is it fair? No, it's never fair when someone is killed by the state in an accident. That's never fair. It's wrong, it's tragic, it's bad. Is it murder? That's a different question. And our whole legal system is built upon what is the guilt, what is the culpability of an individual in an act under the circumstances presented. It's not a bad thing happened, let's go find someone to blame for it criminally. It's not how it works. But that is what we're seeing from these protesters now who did exactly what we knew they would, running around the country now, attacking police in the streets. 2 cops shot last night in Louisville. Let's get into that. Riots were expected in Louisville, and riots happened. We've got somebody joining us now who is there on the front lines, letting us know what really went down. Julio Rosas is with us now. He is a senior writer at townhall.com. Julio, glad you're safe and sound, man. What happened last night? What'd you see?
So there were a lot of marches. There was a lot of rioting in the aftermath of the grand jury decision that was announced yesterday. The city was kind of bracing for that, and unfortunately, the riots kind of came to fruition. Around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock last night at the Hall of Justice, which is where the city government is kind of located around in the downtown area. People started to set fires all over the place. And then at one point, they tried to set fire to the wooden boards that were protecting the windows on the Hall of Justice. And so at that point, the Louisville Police Department declared it to be an unlawful assembly, and they said that they had to leave or else the crowd control munitions were going to be used. And so officers inside the building had to come out to put out the fires, but they were just absolutely pelted with all sorts of thrown projectiles. And so they had to retreat back inside. The crowd then left the area because they didn't want to be tear gassed. And so they were trying to go in through the side streets because they were trying to evade police from cutting them off. And then at one point it was over on Broadway Street where they were marching towards the police officers that were up ahead. The officers fired 2 flashbangs in the air that exploded overhead. And then about 2 seconds later, that's when we started to hear gunshots ringing out, and people really started to scatter because obviously we don't know who's being shot at. And then at that point, a large number of police officers just swarmed into the area to clear everybody out.
So there were gunshots. From what I read, 2 officers were hit. What do we know about them, and what do we know of the person who shot them?
So the police chief later that night, I went to the hospital where the 2 officers were taken to, and the police chief said that they did receive non-life-threatening gunshot wounds, and that they are expected to make a full recovery. And at the time, he said that they had a suspect in custody, and that's as far as I know. And they did finally release the names of the 2 police officers, and of course, this whole thing's about resulting of Black Lives Matter and protecting minorities. Well, one of the officers was shot was African American.
And they have a suspect in custody, Julio?
Yes, they do.
What do we know about the suspect?
Not much from last I heard. I haven't seen much of an update in terms of that. I think that they're also still looking because there was also other gunshots that happened in that area and along with the rest of Louisville, because again, it was just chaos. It was just unfortunately kind of a repeat of what we've seen across the country.
I'm assuming it was very similar to what we saw what you saw, I should say, on the front lines in Kenosha.
Sort of. Kenosha was just because it's a much smaller town with a much smaller police force, so that's why they were overwhelmed with trying to protect the county courthouse, and then the rest of the downtown area was at the mercy of the rioters and looters. And so Louisville had state troopers on standby. They were able to clear out Jefferson Square Park after the gunshots and after the officers were hit. And so this was what I can say. This was not a mostly peaceful march because as they were marching through, people were breaking off and setting fires. They were breaking the uncovered windows, and they were being cheered on by the crowd. And of course, there was members of the media there, including myself, and they were telling people, stop recording, get the cameras out of here, and they were threatening the people who had the big cameras because obviously you can't really hide that. So this was not a mostly peaceful march. That much I can tell you.
We're speaking to Julio Rosas, senior writer at Town Hall. Julio, we've got about a minute. I want to ask you, though, what you think in terms of any preparation, coordination. There was that video of the U-Haul full of protest and riot material that pulled up broad daylight right in downtown Louisville. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there was a woman who was saying shields, and at first I thought she was asking for people who had shields to move up to the front of the crowd, which is a very common tactic. But then as I got closer to her, I could hear her saying, we have shields, and she was pointing to the U-Haul truck. At that point, people were just rushing, and they were grabbing all sorts of stuff, banners, homemade shields, and all that. And so there is definitely organization behind this, and especially when you see in places like Portland, where they have it down to an art form essentially. But there is a supply chain, and there is organization within this. How far and how far up and how deep it goes, I'm not entirely too sure. But it was a pretty shocking thing to see, because that was the first time I had ever seen anything like that.
Julio, just real quick, are we expecting more in Louisville, or do you think it's going to calm down?
So I think because, unfortunately, we did have those two officers shot, the police kind of are taking zero chances. What we saw last night, they really cracked down pretty hard. They actually rounded up a lot of reporters in their crackdown and arresting people, including two reporters with the Daily Caller. And so I think they're going to really be bringing the hammer down on anything nefarious that might happen. And
we'll see. Could happen elsewhere in the country. Julio Rosas of Town Hall, everybody. Julio, stay safe, man. Thanks again for all your reporting. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Buck.